Hi, everybody. This is nurse practitioner Cindy Kennedy, and I am with Dr. Diane Mueller today. And she's a naturopathic physician, and she specializes in Lyme and mold and many other things as well. And we're going to talk about her whole journey and how she came to be this practitioner that treats a lot of these different things. And it's exciting because she comes from the Colorado area, which that's more than an area, the Denver area. She's a graduate of National University of Naturopathic Medicine. Did I get that right this time?
You sure did.
I did. Yay. And she is actually a survivor of mold and Lyme disease and irritable bowel. And so I think that's like a lot of us, we get into this space because we've dealt with the horrendous issues of things that medicine doesn't necessarily know what to do with. And so, Dr. Diane, welcome to Living with Lyme.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Really appreciate your work and having me on the podcast.
Well, this is great. And it's funny, everybody out there that are just listening and not seeing this. She looks just like one of my friends, Pam. And honest to God, I will show you a picture of her at some point. It's really neat to see somebody who looks just like somebody. And Pam and her whole family come from Wisconsin. So she's got that cute little, I don't know what you call it, in that little speech. There's a little twang or something.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's jump in here, and I want to know about your personal story. How did you become resilient?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's such an important thing to talk about because it's just so important, I think, in the Lyme and Mold community that people feel so understood. And basically, my story was that I, like so many of you guys that I'm sure are listening, went to, doctor after doctor and had a lot of normal lab tests run, and everything was, kosher. There was no problems, minor things like my white blood cell count was like on the borderline of low, but never, never a problem, never like out of range. And that was generally it. And when it really, I started doing a lot worse as I was going through school as far as symptom-wise. When I was in naturopathic medical school, at the height of it, I was having a lot of neurological things where I was losing, feelings in my fingers and my toes. I couldn't feel, like if I was driving sometimes, I'd start to lose feelings. So I'd have to pull over until that symptom would pass. Or the other thing that would happen that was really scary was I would forget where I was. So I would try to take these small, 5-minute walks every day because that's all I could do. And sometimes I'd turn the corner around the block, and it was like just complete amnesia would take over. And I would call them episodes because it would only last for typically, up to 5 minutes. So it wasn't like it was, these long periods of time. And then all of a sudden, everything would come back to me and I would, just make my way home. But it was incredibly scary. And in medical school, as I'm, sure it was true for you, in nursing school, it's like there's so much studying and so much stress that it was really easy to just kind of brush it under the rug as like medical school syndrome. But when I graduated and my friends and my colleagues started getting better, they were healing from medical school syndrome and my symptoms started getting worse, that's when I really knew that something was up.
Oh, that's awful. How did you find the help you needed?
Honestly, I just started doing a lot of research. I ended up treating myself, and I ended up treating myself because at the time, all I could find were Lyme. I tested myself. I started, running tests, found that I had Lyme, and then it was really difficult for me to find anybody that wasn't doing triple antibiotic therapy for an entire year. And I really didn't want to go that route. So that sprung me into, the research that I now know and, utilize in my practice. So it was really good in that it got me researching deeply this topic, but it's such a problem, right? Where it's like, I had to learn how to treat this because I couldn't find anywhere to go.
Isn't that's everybody's shaking their head out there. Everybody's going, yeah. And as we know, when things get, time passes and there's so much collateral damage. I love that term. I use it all the time. You know, when people start talking about things that kind of happen after that diagnosis, and, you know, where you take a step forward and a step back, but then you end up with, just like you said, you had a lot of that neurologic stuff. It's all part of this whammy that it really causes. You know, I know that you work hard to help your patients restore their health, and it's a big mindset kind of thing, isn't it?
It is, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about, Cindy, because I feel like it's one of the things that I think in the Lyme community needs to be talked about, and it's not talked about enough. And so one of the things that I'm fairly obsessed with is the research on mindset and on how our mind and our thinking actually influences our stress hormone levels, our immune system even. And there's really cool studies. For example, there's one, I don't know if you've seen this one, where it's like they put everybody on stage to induce a stressor. And the stressor that my favorite stressor around how they induce stress in our research is they make people do math on stage in front of an audience.
Oh, forget
it. Right? Because that clearly is stressful, right? So basically one of this study does that to induce the stressor, but then what they look at is what people are thinking about prior and post getting on stage. And so if they're thinking something that's a little more negative Nancy around oh, this is going to be, I'm going to fail, this is going to be the worst thing ever, I'm going to, pass out on stage, versus people that are this is going to maybe be challenging and I'm not looking forward to it, but maybe I'll learn something. And they're finding that silver lining. And what these studies are finding is that, the stress hormone responses, like cortisol, for example, are very, very different. Same stressor, how we're actually looking at it. And of course, that trickles down to our immune system. So it's so important. You find that too?
Well, I find that my stress, I can only imagine, when something is kind of out of the comfort zone, and then again, I think it has a lot to do with your nurture component of the nature nurture. I mean, some of it I think is inbred a little bit, but that, that component, how were you raised? Were you raised, where you worried a lot, or you were, tomorrow may be a terrible day. So, your cup is half full, or those people that are really fortunate that they look on the bright side of a lot of things and their cup is really half full. So it just depends. And I think the longer people are sick and just, they wonder, what is tomorrow going to bring? And it's funny because when I describe my battle is every day was Groundhog Day, and you kind of lose that ability to be positive because maybe tomorrow, and you'd wake up and it was the same thing, you open your eyes and you're like, okay, well, maybe not so bad, and then just as bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I relate to that.
How do you do this? What's your code? What's your secret code to help people with their mindset?
I really feel like having a morning routine is one of the most essential things, and particularly because what you just tapped into around waking up and, it's being Groundhog Day, I experienced that. I think just about everybody with these kind of conditions experience it, where the first thought that would go through my head when I was suffering every morning was, how bad is it today? And I'd wake up and I'd immediately do this scan of my body, what hurts, what's bad, and it was a horrible way of starting the day. And it's a really challenging thing, right? Because we get into these vicious cycles where the mind triggers the body, then we're inflamed, and that triggers the mind, and yada, yada, yada. So to me, what I've seen be really effective is, strategic habits around starting the morning, ideally, if people can. If, you can't work this into the morning, then some other time of the day. But the research on gratitude is amazing. And I saw this when I was in the Philippines. I was lucky enough right before COVID to be in the Philippines for 3 weeks. And the number of people I met that did not even have what we would call, I would call them dwellings. They were mostly tarps and like, you know, rubbish from the side of the road. And I'm talking like tens of thousands of people, you know, like not so much in Manila, but as soon as you left Manila, they're just everywhere. And they were happy people. And you know, I remember talking to one local who had like nothing to his name, like, you know, hardly $1, literally. And he was talking about how great of a day it was because he got to feed his family that day, you know? And so that's, you know, an example to me around like, you know, literally not having a roof and still finding ways of calming oneself. And I think that's, you know, there's other things I think that help with the morning routine, meditation and breath work. But gratitude, I feel like, is just so important, because it's when we start to compare ourselves to a situation that is less, which essentially is what gratitude is, it really helps reorient the mind to a more parasympathetic type of response.
Yeah, you know, it's really true. And I started with a gratitude journal. And then I think what I did was I cleaned up the counter and I put it away, and then you become, you know, it's a habitual thing. If it's not there, I'm not,
Yes.
you know, but again, when that feeling of dread or doom or whatnot, it's a trigger, and you have to say, okay. And I teach people, maybe this is something that you would agree with, is I teach people, you know, that deep breath when that thought comes in that's negative, to ask yourself, is there anything I can do about that right now? And for the majority of people and times or whatever they're worried about, they can't. They really can't. You know, worried about too much down the road or whatnot. And they say, it's okay, you can think that way, but remember what that's doing to you. So allow yourself the thought, but then allow yourself to pass. I'm going to pass on this right now because I can't do anything about it right now. You know, whereas if there's something that's really worrying you because you're afraid, say, oh my God, if I don't do something about this right now, I'll forget. Okay, well then go ahead, go find a piece of paper and a pen and write it down and give yourself a pass on that one, right? Because now you have done something about it and you don't have to worry so much. It's hard. It's hard to help people be positive, especially if they're just, I think those are really difficult people to deal with if they're just stuck, because, you know, and I guess they become their own worst enemy in some respects. And I have a few of those. Yeah. You know, let me go back to you. How did you treat your Lyme?
So I treated Lyme with a variety of things. I mean, using a lot of, you know, from the mindset perspective, using a lot of meditation. I've done as much as, you know, 36-day meditation retreats. So I've really taken the mental component of it seriously, because I was having a lot of really pathological thoughts. So that was a huge component of it. I used a lot of herbal therapies. So I was, and we are now using, you know, mostly herbal therapies in our practice for Lyme, because one of the things that I've seen is that I feel like I see less rates of recurrence for people, in my professional opinion, when we use herbal medicine. So I used a lot of that. I was doing bee venom therapy injections. I was using ozone suppositories, which was really helpful. I did some neurofeedback for about a year at one point. So I was using a lot of different tools, but the herbal therapies worked really, really, really well. And some of how I think what differentiates herbal therapies from success versus not success, in my professional opinion, is how we use them. Like there's some prescribing methods that I feel like don't work as efficiently and effectively as others. Do you find that?
Well, I guess I don't have quite the answer to that. I have to say that one of the things is I encourage people that if they're really having a hard time, we have to back off a little bit, try not to stop all the way, and then continue to try to move forward. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, what I've seen to be really helpful is like pulsation therapy. So where we do something like kill for 5 days, take 2 days off, and on the 2 days off, we focus on mitochondrial support, building up the adrenals, supplementing with nutrients, and that's what I did. That's what we do in our practice around like, kind of focusing on the fact that, like you mentioned, it's like this cascading kind of effect. There's just, I forget what you called it, but there's like this widespread type of thing,
Collateral
that happens.
damage.
Collateral, that's the word, yes, the collateral damage. Yes, so it's like with that, we know that we have like adrenal collateral damage, we have thyroid collateral damage, we have melatonin and circadian rhythm and detoxification and on and on and on and on. So we kind of rotate between the killing and then like the tonifying, the building up, the cleaning up of that collateral damage. And that's what we have seen to really help people from getting so depleted from, just always being in this like killing mode, which is, good and we have to do it, but it can be exhausting to the system.
Right. Once you start on the, healing of the collateral damage, you continue on that, correct? Or do you just layer it in, layer it out, layer it in, layer it out?
So the herbal formulas, we've actually created some of our own herbal formulas that we're currently working with a distributor, so hopefully they'll be available soon in 2021. And those we're really excited about because we've been using them for about 5-6 years, so they're well tested. And we actually combine in those formulas things that are killing and a few things that are actually tonifying and building up the immune system and repairing, the body. And so we kind of have it built into it. But then on top of that, so we'll put those formulas in for say 5 days, or sometimes 3 weeks. So sometimes we'll do 5 days on, 2 days off. Other times we'll do 3 weeks on, 1 week off. And then on that off time, whether it's those 2 days or that 1 week a month, then we're building in extra layers of, kind of helping with that collateral damage.
Right.
So it's always there at some baseline, and then we pulse it in higher amounts.
Right.
Is how we've been doing it. Yeah.
I find that, reaching and really given the person who's sitting in front of you the explanation of what it's doing, I think people are more likely to follow through when they understand the underlying reason. As part of my practice, I partner with my daughter, and she's my oldest daughter. She is a registered dietitian, and she's functionally trained with Susan Allen, who is a big proponent with functional nutrition. So, I mean, it takes a long time to deal with someone in terms of that medical route. Now, by combining something else, like someone who just deals with the food and explains it, I think we get a good bang for the buck. And the thing with Kara is that most people are afraid because they're in their head, they're thinking she's going to take all this stuff away from me. And she actually doesn't work that way. She adds things in and tries to do some substitution and tries to make sure people understand what they're eating and why they're eating, and eat the color of the rainbow. And this is why, I mean, we know food is medicine. I just think that the palate of a lot of people, or maybe the way they were brought up, or we deal with a lot that we're treating one member of the family and the rest of the family does not want to participate. That becomes an issue because people are cooking, and I'm like, oh my God, these people just have to all partake in this part of healing because it's a family affair, especially when it comes to the kids. It's an interesting concept with kids because they see what their friends are having. Well, actually, this is a good time to treat people during COVID because no one's really going to school. So
That's true.
Jimmy's
Take that variable out.
right. Jimmy's peanut butter and jelly sandwich isn't very exciting because no one's seeing it. So that's really good.
Totally.
It is. It is. Do you have something that you prep people with to help them with resiliency? I mean, outside of having, a plan for every day and what you're doing, are you just very, very optimistic with people, or do you find that niche that person needs? What's your scheme?
Yeah, so, kind of like you, working with your daughter, we work in a, collaborative sense in my practice. So Dr. Meuller, my business partner, is also my husband. So that's super fun, working with family member. And then we have multiple coaches. So everybody, when they come into our practice, they'll work with our entire team. So our coaches, for example, we have a mindset coach, we have a nutrition coach, we have an accountability coach. And so it's really the way we've kind of designed things is that some people really have nutrition pretty dialed. They don't really need that aspect much, but they're going to talk themselves into this very, vicious cycle in their head, and they need more of the mindset. Other people just need the reminders, like, do your mindset. They're willing and they're excited to do it, but they're just going to forget. So having that accountability, partner. So, we can kind of match people with the combination of sessions with the coaches depending upon their needs. And really our goal is to, find people that truly are willing and ready to change and to put in the effort, because, this kind of transformation is just, it's not a pill, and it doesn't work if we're not ready to put in the effort. So we try to talk to people ahead and do discovery calls like you to really determine, are we the right fit? But as long as we are, our approach is largely in figuring out the type of support that people need, and then, arranging their treatment strategies according to their uniqueness around their needs.
That sounds great. That sounds great. Modern medicine, conventional medicine doesn't have anything like this, and,
right.
and especially not in a collaborative one type office situation. They write little scripts, go see a nutritionist, and they don't even know what that term means, really.
Yes. That's true.
I don't know. Why do you think Lyme is so difficult to treat and take care of these people that are sick for so long?
Yeah, well, that brings me into one of the things that I know you and I have talked about offline that I love, which is the persister cells. And the persister cells are a really important component of Lyme, because it really does lead in, it talks about basically that exact question around why is this so difficult. And persister cells are basically a type of cell that they're tolerant to antibiotics. And so that's different than antibiotic resistance. Antibiotic resistance, it's easy to kind of explain this from a biology standpoint, where most bacteria in the world, not all, their DNA is just it's just in a circle, a plasmid. And if one bacteria has in their DNA encoded something for antibiotic resistance, then another bacteria comes along, and it's almost like they just swap their DNA. They share their DNA, and then the new bacteria is like, oh, I got the upgrade. I'm also antibiotic resistant. So that's normal. And normally in bacteria, when you do this, the original DNA still, it's like a new DNA. The original DNA is lost. All you see is the complete new DNA. And so that's what we're used to with antibiotic resistance. But these persister cells behave in a very, very different way. And these persister cells, basically, if you look at their DNA, they're completely resistant to antibiotics, but yet they have no evidence of that in their DNA. Basically, their DNA is still intact, but yet they still have this antibiotic resistance. So they kind of operate in their own unique way, which we know tuberculosis has persister cells. We know E. coli has persister cells, which is my theory on, since E. coli is really related to UTIs. And so many people have these chronic UTIs, and they treat them, and then they come back. And I think that's, likely, theoretically, it's, because of the persister cells. So it's not the first time we've seen persister cells, but, you know, it's less common in the antimicrobial world. So a lot of the challenge has been, we think we're getting better. You know, people are giving, you know, doxycycline and, you know, these common drugs. And these drugs we now see will not, they'll convert cells into persister form, and they will not be able to treat the persister cells if they exist. So that's, you know, one of the problems we're seeing is that there's this lack with a lot of treatment plans, which is why I see a lot of people that get better from these antibiotic therapies and then sometimes revert later on, is because the persister cells have come out of hiding. So I think that's one of the most important things with, you know, with Lyme, and why it continues to be so hard, is there's this missing component that hasn't yet been really addressed by many people in, you know, in treatment strategies.
And addressing that with an herbal approach, do you feel is a better way to get after these persister cells?
Yeah, I mean, there's some research for sure on dapsone and daptomycin as drugs that are anti-persister, and there are some challenges with those drugs. I think using something like that is definitely a step in the right direction. There are some challenges such as daptomycin is incredibly expensive, and there are side effects of these drugs, but they can certainly be used according to research for persisters. Other things that we've seen in research to be helpful are a couple things. One is pulsation therapy, which is why we do that pulsation therapy with our, you know, with our clients. In addition to wanting to build them up, it's also because we're getting them on and off the antimicrobials, which has been shown to help with persisters. And then the other herb, and this was a really cool study that was published just earlier this year in the Frontiers of Medicine magazine, or journal, I mean. And that particular journal, that particular study, was actually looking at an herb called Cryptolepis. And Cryptolepis is like, that study is just so exciting about seeing what that herb did for persister cells. So we're now using that herb quite a bit in our practice.
Oh, good to know. Good to know. Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the preparations I use has cryptolepis in it. And you know what? It's funny because some people are so adamant about one herb, one problem. And I don't know. I mean, I just find that things that are grouped together may complement each other a little bit more. So there may be certain things that a single herb will help with, but I just think the blend or the combination, it can be more effective. What do you?
Yeah, me too.
You feel that way too? I'm glad. Because gosh, you know, we have to agree on something here. We're agreeing so far on everything.
Yeah, right, hooray.
What do you think about that sensitive person? That no matter what you do, you could open the jar or something and pass it, and they, oh, no, I'm not really making fun of sensitive people, truly, because some people are just so toxic, so overburdened that anything puts them over the edge. What do you feel is the most helpful when dealing with someone that's really that sensitive?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you know, going slow and doing things one at a time is important. One of the nutrients, though, that I have found to really kick people out of that is choline. And the reason why is, so, you know we detox right by like the liver breaking things down, and then the liver puts the toxins through the bile ducts into the intestines, and then we hopefully, you know, they go out in our stool. But what we see is like there's a transporter that is actually taking the toxins that are in the liver and transporting them into the bile, you know, the bile ducts, the bile canaliculi as they're called, in order to get to the intestines. So that transporter, it has to be working well for us to get things out. Because if it's not, then what happens is the liver starts breaking things down. The liver has to process these, you know, these nutrients too. And if the liver starts breaking things down and that transporter is not working correctly, then they just, you know, reabsorb into our circulation. So choline has been shown to be huge for turning on that transporter protein. And I've seen some really, really amazing results when people are sensitive, when people are having some, you know, herxing, these types of scenarios, by giving them a lot of, you know, just, you know, continually putting choline in their body until they are feeling better. And we can take a lot of choline. Like, there was one study that was looking at the human need of choline, and I think it was saying that if we got all our cholines from egg yolks, which are one of the highest sources, I think it was saying we needed like 24 egg yolks a day or something like that. So most people are pretty deficient.
Yeah, I love phosphatidylcholine. I love it. I love learning how to spell it too, so that
Yes.
it's phosphatidylcholine.
I like that.
I think it's great, and I guess my explanation to a lot of people are, especially when I'm talking about their nerves, because of the sheaths along the nerve channels and how they can become maybe demyelinated or injured or whatever. And I talk about it as a softening, that it actually helps these membranes become more flexible. And, there's so many ideas out there. There's so much, there, like, one nutrient company will spend a lot of time talking about whether it's detox. Somebody else may talk about, the pathways of certain things. And, some people are all about the genetics, and it becomes really, really difficult for even the practitioner, as well as the person, the patient, who is then on Dr. Google and trying to find the newest and hottest remedy for something. And, I guess it's really critical that when you're seeing somebody and you bring ideas to them, that that person can explain to you why this is a good idea or this is not a great idea right now, or, there may be some other thing that we haven't gotten to yet. Because if you pour everything on a person's plate who's sitting in front of you for the first time, they just back up. It's too much for them. So, kind of that
Yes.
slow route, like, making sure, like, my people, they got to be pooping. If they're not pooping, we can't do anything. Right.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's funny because in one of my, Facebook groups, one of the questions were, and it was a health coach, and maybe because they're not necessarily used to interviewing patients as in depth as a healthcare provider, she wanted to know the right way to talk to people about their bowel habits. And to me, I got the giddies about it, because that's what we talk about. And, depending on the person's demeanor, you can call it one word or another word, or, I don't know. There's famous words for, poopies or potties, or, you can get kid-like with all that too. So, so explaining a lot of education for people to learn and really be part of they gotta be part, it's a partnership, right?
Oh, for sure. And I agree. The explaining, it's so much more motivating, I think, to us humans to do something when we understand the why,
Yeah.
So really understanding that why, I think, is so key for,
Right.
all of us humans to stay motivated.
Right. Because I don't know about you, but in terms of growing up, just as, the idolization of your physician, you would never, like, my parents would never, first of all, probably my grandparents would never go to a doctor, but then my parents would never, they would just there was no asking questions. There was no, for fear that their physician or whatever practitioner would get angry at them. And, now with medicine, it is documented that a primary care visit is about 7 minutes face to face. So where is the time? How can you ask questions and get a sufficient answer in 7 minutes? And I think that's what's hard. And I think more people do appreciate the fact that you sit and you explain it. I'm big about analogies. I love
Yeah.
analogies. Do you have any really good ones to share with me right now?
Not off the top of my
All
head, but
right,
if I
all right.
think of any,
If you
I'll let
think
you
of them,
know.
send me an email because I love analogies. I do, I do.
Yeah, for sure.
What happened to you with mold? Mold was a problem for you as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, my symptoms that I explained were really all wrapped up. Some I'm sure were coming from Lyme, some I'm sure were coming from mold. I was living in Portland, Oregon, when things got really bad, and obviously that's a damp place, but I even had a resurgence of symptoms 5 years ago here in Colorado and had to move out of the house I was in and move to the house I'm in now because of such a severe mold problem. So it makes, we own our house now, which is, I think, such a blessing for anybody that has mold because you can control things. But, it's like having, previously I was renting and being in a situation where there's mold and not everybody understands mold illness and don't really get that. I think you can just scrape it with some bleach and put some paint on it and it's fine. So yeah, it's definitely a big problem, but it's really hard, I think, clinically with both Lyme and mold. I see the symptoms overlap so much. So it's really hard to say, well, this specific thing was really more the Lyme or that specific thing was really more the mold. It's more, I look at it more of like, if both of these things are involved and we have symptoms, we have a problem.
Right.
And both need to be treated. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny because I was having a conversation with parents this morning over their teenage daughter, and I said, kids are often more resilient than an older person. And they asked me why, and I was prepared. I really felt that the answer was toxicity and your toxic burden, and what do you have already? And so when you're younger, you probably have less of a burden. You haven't been around as much to, get as many metals or glyphosate or, whatever the case may be. And of course, as we get older, it takes more prep, more conscientious mindfulness to take care of yourself. It's much more than wrinkles, or age spots. It's really about the process of the body not functioning half as well as it used to. It's a bummer.
Yeah, it is. It is. And things definitely change when we age. And I get really frustrated with the medical model that just like blames everything on age around like, I remember being like very little and my mom was in her 30s and her saying like, well, I have this symptom, I'm just getting old. So we're like told that like very early decades. And my meditation teacher is 82 years old. And so some of the meditation I do is sitting and moving. So he's always on a stage, and usually the stage is 3 or 4 feet high. He will literally jump up and down on and off the stage at 82. He travels all over the world. Like he'll just do retreat after retreat after retreat after retreat, and always happy, always so much energy. And 82. So it really, to me, like has shown like, there is absolutely a way, things change, absolutely, absolutely things change as age, but there is a way to age in a way where we feel, vital. And I think one of the key silver linings of things like Lyme and mold is oftentimes it's the trigger for people to go and like clean up the metals and all these other things that would have shown up in their life later. But now they get the opportunity to clean them up, oftentimes earlier than when they're in their 80s and, 90s and these sorts of things, which is really going to help dramatically with the aging process.
My biggest thing lately is what people say. And the line is, well, this is about a specific problem, but I'm going to get diabetes anyway. It's in my family. My brother has it, my mother and father. And you're looking and you're like, that's not true. Oh, it's genetic. It's only genetic if you're totally not taking care of yourself. That, doctor, like I think it's Dr. Hyman, says genetics are the gun and the environment is what pulls the trigger. And it's true about whatever we're putting into our body. And I think the argument over, you know, gluten and sugar really can get real heated. I don't get it, but that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, I think that the facts are that we know what is a good thing to kind of avoid, but trying to get people to buy into that is yet another story. You've spent some recent time doing a lot of research and doing a lot of writing. So I want you to tell us all about your new book that's coming out.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So the title is Use Your Mind to Heal Your Mold and Lyme. And it's really looking at a mind-body approach to, you know, to Lyme and mold and chronic infections. So we go over things in there like, you know, persister cells and why there's recurrence and what we can do about them from like a body and a physiological process. So, because I wanted to bring more awareness to the community about the power of the mind and about, you know, more details on how, when we feel every day like you know, so horrible, and even like showering is hard, how can we move from that to, you know, a positive mindset? And so it's written like in a way where there's a lot of supportive care strategies around, okay, week 1, you know, take 2 minutes. All you need is 2 minutes. And then walking people through the psychology of how we change habits and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of research on happiness, on mindset, on mind hacking, on mind training. But I also was concerned when I was originally writing it that if I focused too much on the mind, I was going to give people the impression that, you know, the body is not important and that we can just change everything with the power of the mind. And, you know, my belief is we have a mind and we have a body, and they both play roles in disease. So it's really, the work is really bridging these two worlds of, yeah, we absolutely need all these physiological things for the body. Here are strategies. But we also need a lot of strategies and training for reprogramming our mind. Because like you said earlier, even beyond Lyme and mold, a lot of these thought processes come from our childhood. And we've just been, you know, replaying these thoughts around whatever it is, around like, I'm an ill person if it's been since childhood, or, you know, I get overwhelmed easily, or life is so hard, whatever story we have from childhood. So it really starts unpacking that as well.
Yeah, that sounds like it's going to be more of a how-to and a helpful book rather than, I mean, there'll be information, true, but at least it's one of those things I think people need a definitive pathway. And what you're saying is this book is going to provide people with, you know, instructions and whatnot. It's kind of like saying, you know, here's the end point and you got to figure out how to get there. You're actually providing them with help and hope to get from point A to point B. And that's hard.
Exactly.
That's hard.
There's,
you know, that mindset kind of thing is really a difficult fact for people to wrap their head around. But I guess when you break it down to simplistic forms, I think, and you show people, I guess that's helpful. I could use a better mindset on most days. I have to admit that. And, you know, it's funny because I think that for a lot of people, they're not used to really looking at what they can be happy about. They're more or less looking at what they can be mad about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's how I think we're programmed. I mean, even, you know, look at the news and most things that are reported are like not very happy. And so it's easy, I think, for the psychology to start orienting to like, wow, there's just bad things everywhere. And there are bad things everywhere, but there's also good things too. And you know, and so I like you, like this is not, I think this work is not like, oh, poof, I'm done. I've done my mindset work. You know, it's something I have to actively attend to every day is, you know, my mind and my mindset. And every once in a while I have a day where I'm like, oh, I've got this. And my day doesn't go as well internally. Like it makes a big difference. And so then I can, you know, quickly reorient to, you know, noticing like this is what happens when I do my work, and this is what happens when I decide that I've got it under control and I don't need to work on my mind. I think it's always a work in progress, you know.
Right, right. What do you do when you have that kind of gut feeling like, oh my God, I'm running behind, or I'm, you know, I've got a patient that's not either, you know, understanding and they're angry. Angry patients are tough. How do you help that patient that's angry?
I mean, sometimes I feel like it depends upon the level of anger. Sometimes I do feel like there are some people that are at a point where they're just not able to hear me. And in that case, you know, I think referring to, you know, different therapeutic approaches. I really like dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. I really like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. So I think those are both really great therapies that work on the mind. So sometimes I do think people are at a point where it's like there's so much happening that they need actual, you know, therapy and working with a licensed therapist to do so. Other times I think it works really well with angry patients to, sometimes people I find just want to be heard. But as a practitioner, I think it's exhausting to work with angry people. And I think it's really, really hard. And so that's where, as a practitioner, like in the morning, that's when my morning routine is. And for me, that happens, you know, very early in the morning, 5:30, oftentimes 6 o'clock, before other people are awake. And that's why I like doing it in the morning so much, because I get my time in to like get this right before I encounter any of that. Because oftentimes if I wait to try to do my self-care mind hacking stuff until 1 in the afternoon, then life happens, you know, and it becomes very difficult.
I had a really great question. Oh, I know what it is. What is the most difficult type of person to take care of? I know we talked about the sick person, we talked about the angry person, but in your practice, there's a type of, maybe it's a personality, maybe it's, you know, someone with a different mindset, maybe a different background, maybe, you know, I'm not trying to point at one particular breed or nationality or whatnot, but do you have one type of person that you can identify that are, you know, it's going to be a longer road or more difficult to deal with?
I really think it's more of an internal state, like anybody who, it's so easy with Lyme and Mold to have like a victim type of mentality around, because these things, like, you know, we are victims of these things. Like we get, you know, an infection from an insect bite or from a cat scratch, or we're in a moldy place and we don't, you know, we don't have control over that. In some ways we are completely victims. And we always have a responsibility, and we have control over how we respond to that and what we do about it. You know, that part we're not a victim to. And I think it's more of a personality type of people who are not willing to, you know, take responsibility around. You know, sometimes I've had people that I try to prescribe 2 or 3 products for, and they don't want to take them, not because they're herxing, but just because it is a lot, they feel like it's a lot of pills to put in their body, you know, for example, and we have to have like a lot of coaching sessions around taking 6 pills a day, for example, or taking 8 pills a day, which I can totally get where people are at when they're not used to this, and it can feel overwhelming. And so having conversations can be important to help people understand the necessity. But if we have those conversations and it's still like not being, prioritized, then it's really hard to get somebody well that's not willing to do the work. And the work's hard. I've done it. Like, I have so much compassion because it's freaking hard, but it doesn't work if we don't do it,
It is. It's interesting because I've talked with people and gotten their perspective, and some people outright say, I can't work harder than you. I'm here to support you, but I can't be doing the work. I have to give it to you, and I'm going to help you and hold your hand through it. But I got to give it to you, and, I mean, that can be harsh reality when you really tell somebody the work is theirs. They have to own it, and they can choose, whether to really give it their all or not. And there are, when I talk to people with that discovery call, there are people, especially in this area of Lyme, that keep jumping ship. They go from one practitioner to another because they're looking for that one thing that'll fix everything. And I talk people out of leaving their providers. I really feel like all the questions that they're asking me or the things that they're unhappy about or whatnot, you just need to write those things down. And actually approach your provider and say, I'm not happy where we are, ask the questions necessary. And then there are other people that really, you can just tell they're not ready to partake. And I tell people, it's a lot of money coming to see us, and I want to be a partner in this. And that's where my I can't work harder than you kind of thing comes in. Yeah. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that statement?
Oh, 100%. I love everything you're saying. There's one of the chapters in my book is called Doctor Hopping, When to Hop and When to Stop. And it's, basically about this concept, because we'll get people on the phone too with discovery calls, and I'm listening to them and they're frustrated and they've been with their provider for 2 months. And I will tell them the same thing around, like, here's the things that, I would recommend that you ask to make sure that you are on the right track, and give them a list of questions. But please give this person like a chance unless unless there's some sign that that's a bad idea. And we'll kind of walk through some supportive questions. So I talk about that in the book, because that's another, when we're talking about things around like who's hard to work with, the other person that is a big red flag is when we talk to them and I see this long list of professionals they've worked with, and they stay with each one for like 1 to 2 months. We can't get anybody with these conditions better, and we can't learn people's body in that amount of time. So it's a big red flag for returning to wellness. So I completely agree with you.
Oh, good. I'm glad. It's interesting because some people are very willing to just take anybody on and whatnot. And I look at it as if I don't have that, excuse me, that right kind of person that's ready to take on this, it actually maybe stops me from taking on somebody who really does need it. I'm real excited to see your book. I really am, because it's interesting when you said when to hop and when not, or whatever that chapter is. But I wouldn't have expected something like that in your book. What else do you have in there? This little goodie here.
I have how to deal with social media, because that's another big. So the idea of this book has been like it's more of like a survivor's guide, right? Around like, these are the issues I see coming up all the time in my practice with my patients that are preventing their wellness. And the doctor hopping is one of them. Social media is a big thing, because sometimes I think it can be really valuable, right? Around like support groups and people that understand, and there's absolute value in it. But other times I find that it's just like bashing and dumping problems, and and there's a lot of people who've lost hope, on these social media platforms. So I've seen, situations where people spin out about, social media. So I give advice around when is social media good, how to use it in a way that can be effective, what to look for in a social media support group if you need support, and how if it's going to be a group that's going to be like a positive thing for your health, or how to know if it's going to be a negative thing for your health.
Wow.
So that's another really cool chapter.
Yeah, I like that. It's tough. Support groups are tough because you usually, it's hard. I'm just going to leave it at that. There's just too much.
Yes.
It's painful. It's painful for some of those people. Really hard. So you know what? We had a great conversation about a lot of things, but we really spent a lot of time on the mind. And I'm getting the sense that this has been a journey for you, and the development of this has really stemmed out of you living the life that really needed to learn how to focus to improve not only just your healing and wellness, but to stay healthy and to be able to do the work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's stemming from both that as well as what I've seen clinically, just a huge missing link. And I think there's so much need to demystify the mind and destigmatize the mind. Oftentimes we think about working with the mind means it just has a bad stigma, versus really looking at we are humans, and by the nature of being human, the mind just naturally creates stories. So I've seen it, definitely in my own healing journey, and the body too. I've been very diligent about my herbs, my supplements, my injection therapies. I've done all of that. But I do feel like it is something I'm emphasizing a lot these days, simply because I feel like it is a missing link. And it's, again, not to say that all of these other things are not important. I think they're actually, as important. But the thing is, I think we need to bring up more work in the mindset and in hacking the mind and training the mind, keeping all the body things, keeping the lifestyle, keeping the diet, keeping the supplements. All of those are essential, but it's just, in my mind, kind of the missing, part of the missing link.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Where can people reach you?
So my clinic is Medicine with Heart, so they can go medicinewithheart.com. And I wanted to invite everybody, the first 2 days of my book launch, which right now is set for May 6th, is the current date we have set. The first 2 days, we are going to be giving the ebook away for free. So that would be a really good time to invest in this book. It's going to be the cheapest time to invest in this book. And so if anybody is interested, I'm kind of creating a list of people who want to have announcements when we are closer to that date and we know for sure it's going to be the 6th, that people can take advantage of those, those 2 days of that free book. So people can email us. Our email is service@medicinewithheart.com. So people can email us at service@medicinewithheart.com and just say, hey, just add me to your book list and, let me know when it comes out. And you can also text our office, which is 720-722-1143. And if you just text and say, I want to be on the book launch list, then we'll just add you to the list. So whatever is easiest is great. But our clinic, again, is Medicine with Heart.
That's great. And that sounds really a great place to be, Medicine with Heart. We all need a little bit of TLC, don't we?
Right? So
Thank
true.
You. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. For everybody who is listening, this has been Dr. Diane Mueller with me, Cindy Kennedy. And for more information, you can look at our websites, www.livingwithlyme.us for podcast. And then for my practice, www.pursuewellness.us. I hope everybody is staying safe, taking good care, and do take your supplements. We really mean that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Cindy.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. Everybody out there, be well.